My name is Londiwe Mntambo, and I'm the Executive Director at We Are the People. Welcome to our conversation today, titled Leading the Way Women in the GNU. This conversation is hosted by We Are the People in partnership with the Soul City Institute for Gender Justice. Looking forward to it. I'm so excited to have you guys on our panel today. I'm going to allow you guys to introduce yourselves because umuntu akaziwe ngendlela athanda ukwaziwa ngayo. And then I also want you, just as you introduce yourself, to please just give me some of your thoughts around the GNU as a result, particularly for the people. Is it an ideal result for abantu base South Africa, as you introduce yourself?
I reflect on the GNU as a kind of crisis moment in South Africa, at least insofar as it pertains the people of South Africa. And that doesn't have anything to do with, it probably will, but it's not primarily because there's something essentially difficult or problematic with the structure of governments of national unity or even grand coalitions for any reason. It's just the framework of the GNU that we exist under right now. As far as I can see, it undermines, I think, the general will of the people. And I'll say that much because I think about the DA as, the fourth Madonna phase of the National Party. It's the National Party going into coalition with the Liberation Party. And there's something about that which is counterintuitive to the general will of South Africans who are, by and large, black and have lived through and whose lives have been shaped by the history of the National Party turned Democratic Alliance. And this isn't just, so I think in the first place, it undermines that general will, which is to move away and to create distance between the masses and white minority rule and its capital and its monopolies, et cetera, et cetera. Secondly, I think the framework in particular sets it up so that the ANC and the DA sit in a locked up scenario where they may and will have to, if we look at their history, veto each other's decisions, whatever those contestations may be about. These are some of the pettiest comrades out here. And so there will be a lot of grandstanding and blockading and hopefully, but I anticipate because it's the DA, lots of court and gerrymongering. So what usually happens when there's that state of affairs is that the people suffer not just the non-impacting of framing and putting out policies, but the prospect of those policies being implemented in the various provinces in a way that is somewhat egalitarian. So, yeah, I guess I'm not for it. I'm not for it because 22% shouldn't put the DA in this kind of vetoing power position. And even though the ANC's percentage has diminished, the black vote hasn't changed very substantially. It's moved among and betwixt other black parties with a general liberation nationalist consciousness. And as a result, I feel like we've been bamboozled, and this is by and large with the aid of the ANC and its president, into a coalition with minority interests, and therefore I foresee more inequality, such as we do see everywhere where these minority interests are able to get a foothold. That was long, but I'm not down.
A gloomy picture. Ati paints a gloomy picture. Nompumelelo?
I am not for the GNU as well. And I agree with all the points of Ati, the inequality, I feel like the GNU is a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity. They could have used this to address gender equality, to address democracy. They could have, it's not an ideal situation already as is, but they could have salvaged it, the powers that be, had they felt.
Had they wanted to.
Had they wanted to. So definitely not for the GNU, for many, many reasons. Thanks.
I love that. Thanks. Let's hear Khanyi.
Hi, I am Khanyisile Mlambo, academic, foreign policy expert, and depending on the day, political analyst. When it comes to my reflections on the GNU, I think I differ with my fellow panelists. I am slightly more optimistic, although I do understand the concerns that you've both shared. I think the reason why I'm optimistic is the GNU has presented a situation in South Africa where ANC hegemony has slipped, right? And it forces government to finally work together and figure out how to lead and how to govern South Africa. Yes, sure, there are many pitfalls within what could ultimately happen within the GNU and how the GNU could ultimately affect the most important person in South Africa, which is the citizen. But I think it does present a great opportunity for collaboration. But it is also quite a scary time in South African politics because I think our political landscape has been forever changed due to the GNU and the ANC losing hegemony. And I think in regards to where we're going to go in South African politics, only time will tell. And whether the GNU will be a success, I think it's still too early to call it. So I think I'd just rather sit back and see where it goes. But I am hopeful.
Look, we started off with a gloomy picture. We ended up with a bit of a hopeful picture. I think, the GNU is a difficult one. I think as a result, it might not be I don't think it's the most ideal result for the people of South Africa. But I do think that it's an interesting result. And in fact, I actually think it's a reflection of the way that South Africans are thinking about politics and are thinking about elections right now, because majority of the people who are actually registered to vote or even eligible to vote just don't vote. And so for me, that's a big, sort of sounding alarm about where we are in terms of politics and governance and democracy and the way that then people want to engage. I'll come to you just now. I want us to get into, as we continue the conversation, I want us to get into, it's Women's Month. We know the sort of, the sort of narratives around Women's Month, the sort of narratives and the tropes around women in our country and generally, I think, globally, right? We're sitting with a cabinet, this GNU, that's at 43% in terms of representation of women, which is a decline. We are 30 years into the democracy and we've done very well. South Africa is always termed the good policies. We have the best policies in the world. We have the best constitution in the world. And whether or not we agree with those narratives, it's been 30 years into democracy. What are some of our thoughts around this particular GNU, and maybe just looking back a little bit in terms of governance, in the way that we think about representation, that we think about policies, that we think about gender and women, particularly, just beyond representation? And I'll start with you because you wanted to make a comment earlier.
Thanks, Koko. I had wanted to make a comment that let us not forget that the GNU was a way of the ANC maintaining power. They would have been kicked out. And they needed that. So let's not forget that as we speak today. Just looking at the gender parity in the GNU, before I may not be correct. I think it was 43.5%, and it's gone. It was 45 or I think 45%, and it's gone down a few percentages, I think, to 42 or 41 now. So gender representation has gone down quite a bit, and this is concerning. This is especially concerning, right as Nompumelelo Mlambo had pointed out, ukuthi women in this election, in this 7th administration, were the ones who are the majority voters. So those were your people that voted for you, but those are the people that you're kicking out of major decision making policies and structures like that. So that is very problematic. That is incredibly problematic. Finally, just say decolonize. You can go out.
So I'm going to start with your initial question, which is about reflecting on the 30 years of democracy. And I think I'm as gloomy in my reflections about the 30 years of democracy as I am with the GNU, with the GNU being a signet, like a sign to what the problems are with our democracy. And I think when we first go into democratic elections as a country in 1994, the logic goes, what parties we vote into power are a reflection of the common will. So the ANC getting 63% in 1994 is a reflection of the common will. And that is not just representing kind of the majority black nation, because we were not 61%, and therefore, everybody who was eligible and registered to vote didn't go and vote, just as the numbers keep growing that way. But the will of those people who intend to be part of the political process, because this political process is unlike the ones we've known before. It's a democratic one, wherein we get to participate and be included and be a part of informing the decisions that are made, the policies which are drafted, and their implementation over us. But I think an honest South African in 2024 will tell you that we've long lost that hope and zeal for democracy. We are very resigned to things going, and hopefully we can catch some crumbs from wherever the looting is happening, and we can get close to all the right people to be able to do all the things we desire to do. But for the most part, we've given up on a democracy for the many. And I think the ANC slipping to 40%, the rate of people voting, the number of women voting for parties which are not going to advance their political ends and interests, is a reflection of that loss of faith in democracy insofar as we envisaged it to be. We never saw the complicated means and ways we would have to travel in order to get to a kind of common consensus. Now I'm using the kind of language of the framework of the GNU. And as such, even if the ANC goes down to 40%, that's a reflection of the general will. So the majority of people represented in the General Assembly would still be a reflection of the common will, even if the ANC doesn't have a majority. That doesn't change the fact that 40% of the people who go and vote in this country want them over there. And so I don't understand the logic of coalition and collaboration without that being reflected by the many, whose interests are being collaborated for. If the many don't want, for example, the DA in ruling power, you know what I'm saying? That collaboration directly goes against that. More than that, women, I think, in South Africa have lost faith in the idea that having women represent them in parliament, it reflects their interests and protects their democratic rights. And as such, I think we need to ask a more essential question of both the ideas which are important, I guess, to us today. And one is democracy, and two, the representation of women by women, whether we still have faith in that. Is it in fact the case that it's women who deliver optimal ends for the women's citizenry when they sit in cabinet or in the General Assembly? So ultimately what I'm saying is it's it's not the democracy we fought for. These are not the women who represent us. And so then what kind of questions do we need to ask differently? How do we divert our imagination towards our interests and not sustaining something which is slowly going with more speed, going into, I guess, the trash bin as the economy is framed? What about, people registering to vote and then not showing up to vote? Does that reflect? How do we read that? Is it content or discontent that we should be logging together with the results of election in order to determine the Commonwealth and therefore reflect on what can happen?
Yeah. Representation matters. It's super important to have people in front of you who look like you. Abantu abafana nawe. But I think it's also important that we ask questions that go beyond representation, because I think you're absolutely right. It's not all women who are pro-women. It's not all women who are pro-feminist. It's not all women who are pro-democracy. It's not all women who will be pro the policies that are pro-women, particularly black women in this country, as we spoke about inequality earlier on. And so I think as we reflect on 30 years and where we are in terms of policy, particularly implementation of policies for women, it's important that we ask the critical questions around representation, but what goes beyond representation?
But also, Londi, what does representation enable to happen? Because we've had the best representation of anybody on earth, the best policies of everyone on earth, and yet we have the highest rate of a rape of anywhere that's not at war on earth. We have the highest rate of femicide. We have the worst living conditions for women in this country. A black girl is more likely to be raped and or killed than to learn how to read and write. So what are the things that representation enables
Allows
a party
us,
like the ANC to do, while the facade, while the screen of things continues to say we're doing
50-50.
great, but the reality on the ground keeps worsening and worsening for those people?
Just to hop onto the point that you're making there. I think this also speaks to the lack of the implementation of what stands on paper. South Africa is continuously praised for having the best constitution. It speaks about non-racialism. It speaks about a non-sexist society. It speaks about equality. But in practice, that is not what we see, even at the highest level of government. Because even the GNU's statement of intent, its preamble speaks about the exact same thing. It speaks about non-racialism, equality. It speaks about non-sexism. And yet, how is it possible that we are speaking about those things and equality, and yet they're not reflected in the highest offices? I mean, if 22% of the premiers that we have in 2024, 30 years after the democratization of South Africa, are women, that really, there's a missing link somewhere between what we put down on paper and what we practice. So I think it is up to the government to lead the charge against non-racialism, equality, and sexism. Because yes, sure, we have these brilliant policies on paper, but if we don't put them in practice, can we really say that we've seen how the South African Constitution looks like? I don't even believe we've even tried it. We've not really tried the Constitution, and yet we've allowed people to lose faith in the South African Constitution because the people who represent us are not honoring the Constitution. Yeah.
Cool. How do we get what we have on paper to be implemented to also make tangible changes in the lives of women, in the lives of the most vulnerable people in society? We were talking a little bit earlier on about, the joys of motherhood, particularly mina Nompumelelo. I am, being a fairly new mom, I am, a lot of the time the work that I do is for my daughter. The kind of future that I want to create for my daughter is not the one that I live in. This reality sucks. I mean, Ati, I think you articulated it quite well around the, the precarity of black girls in this country. I want us to talk a little bit about some of the policies or maybe even actions that we would want from this GNU around, whether it's around, I think we can move beyond representation, but maybe policies around care work, policies around a gendered kind of governance. We often see, we know that the Minister of Women is also the Minister of Children and people living with disabilities. I don't know if there's another addition to, to the portfolio, but I know that the portfolio is sort of lumped together. It feels like the portfolio for all vulnerable people. And so I want us to talk a little bit about what we think about policy, particularly when it comes to care work, when it comes to like a gendered understanding of governance. How can we make all our different portfolios and all our different ministries more gender conscious, more pro-woman, more pro-black women in particular?
I'd like to kick us off on this one. I think as a starting point, there are just a few things that we need to realize first, which one would be that when women are actively involved and when women are adequately represented in the highest offices that we have, whether that being legislature or parliament, it not only benefits women, but it benefits everyone in society. There are studies that have shown that when women are adequately represented, the economy thrives even more. I mean, there's a study I recently read that said that if women were more adequately represented in countries like Canada, for example, the GDP would increase by more than 4%. So women involvement also directly correlates to economic development. And we cannot have equity if we do not have equality. We need to create a larger space for women involvement and ensure that women are able to afford the cost of childcare so that they can be able to be more economically involved and engaged, because it not only benefits them, it not only benefits women, but it benefits everyone within society.
How does that logic work when the majority of the women concerned exist in a subsisting economy that doesn't inform the kind of national economy you can hang the GDP on in this Canadian way?
I think, I'm going to pull it back to South Africa. I think within that, we need to realize that women, when society regresses, right, what happens is that women have less equality because women are continuously the ones that are last considered. When for instance, unemployment statistics drop or unemployment statistics increase, it's usually women who are hurt the most because we are at the most vulnerable. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the privilege walk, right? The people that you will continuously find who have less privileges are women in society. So I think that the solutions that we need to drive are solutions that put the concerns of women at the forefront, the concerns of children at the forefront, because we cannot become a society that drives legal equality if we do not put the concerns that women have at the forefront. And of course, it becomes difficult because, as you said earlier on, that sometimes the women that represent us in parliament or just generally in politics might not drive pro-women solutions. It's just about amplifying the voice of women who have the interest of women in mind.
Sure. I mean, I think... I don't know that, and maybe Nompumelelo, because you have experience with legislature and in the sort of day-to-day kind of inner workings. I don't know that in the way that our politics are structured right now and our political parties are structured right now, that we have the opportunity to vote for the women that Khanya is talking about.
Sure, we're not representative enough.
Where are they?
And how
Where
do
are
you
these
know them
women?
from the
What?
other girls?
I mean, what a beautiful speech. I was waiting for her to present them to us.
Yeah.
Where are they?
Where
is the
are
question.
they?
I think, interesting question, but I think for me, women are also, of course, we know, preoccupied with the burden of care.
Yeah.
It falls on them largely. And so my choosing to not be on the ballot, for example, is really about bread and butter. Ukuthi kuzodliwa nje kwami Nkosi yami. Yabo. And so maybe that's where the women are. I know that a lot of women have been antagonized by the political system, and political parties. Yes. We know the stories. I almost mentioned a particular story. No, angifuna ukuboshwa. And so they've been antagonized by the space, and so a lot of them, like, they're opting out of voting. A lot of them are opting out of participating in the system. Also, a lot of women, just as you were saying, live under the line, poverty line. They live here, but they still have the same burdens of care, the same burdens of making sure ukuthi wonke umuntu uyadla ekhaya. So they still have the same burdens.
And what's crazy about this is that in the last elections, like any other elections, 55% of the voters were women.
Yeah.
55% of the voters were women, and yet women are not adequately represented. Where are the women? The women, I think they're there. Yeah. But continuously, women are led to have these background role, never at the forefront. Deputization. Because why is it almost the unimaginable that a female president in South Africa is a possibility? Why is that the unimaginable? When we think about politicians, oftentimes the first person that comes to mind is a man.
Do you know what comes into mind right now? Listening to Ati earlier saying, where are the M&E practices? How do we know? How do we determine? Because implementation is not the issue. Fine, we could implement all we like, but who is doing the monitoring and evaluation? Where are the measurables? That's the question that needs answering.
Sure. Who is doing the measuring? Nkosi yami obani abasibhekelayo ukuthi khamba kanjani. Interestingly, I was a part of a bunch of surveys pre-elections that where one of the most shocking results for me was how a lot of South Africans are either turning or just expressing sentiments that I think are anti-women, right?
Yes.
So there was a lot of talk about anti-abortions, for example. I mean, I think we know the political party that is anti the Constitution is also anti-abortions. And we've always known that the more right-winged parties, even the white ones, they are anti-abortion, they're, all of those crazy things. It's 2024, man. How can we be having a conversation, or how can it be part of even our societal makeup or fabric or whatever you want to call it, that there are people and then political parties who are going to represent those people who are still anti-women in that very brazen way?
Well, why wouldn't they be?
Patriarchy.
Why wouldn't they be? Because there's this like catch-22 way in which the culture of any society is determined by the politics, at least the power, political society. And these things are feeding in and out of each other. So when we come into 1994 as a country, as South Africa, we come into a culture of patriarchy, but one that is bolstered through the political process, which is represented through, a very archetypal struggle hero who's a man in a beret, who then turns into utata and becomes, the...
And Umamwini is
she's discarded, and there's no moral conversation about that. There's no moral conversation of that, because the figure of Umamwini with a beret and a gun is no longer palatable to the collaboration culture that we've come into. And so the woman is easier and easier to God, even though, she was the one who would identify this new hero or old hero of ours we have never seen or have never understood to be a part of our daily political lives. So there's a way in which how we choose to poise that moment influences what will become the general culture in South Africa. And that general culture is one of a strong man, is one of a big man. And the history is distorted so much in our general social history and educated history to reflect our constitution as a democracy, our constitution as political agents, as being handed over to us, given to us by these daddies, these struggle daddies, as the streets are having them called by now. So, yes, I'm taking shout out to Maneo, that's her thing.
Before you continue on, I just want to add something there, which is, it's interesting to see how patriarchy is well and alive in South Africa, as it is everywhere else. You touched on
capitalism,
capitalism,
white supremacy.
You touched on Umamwini, and I just want to say that it's interesting to see how ostracized she was for doing the same thing that a man would be celebrated to do. There's a book by
ostracized, humiliated, impoverished, all the things.
There's a book by, I think it's Sisonke Msimang, that discusses that this woman was ostracized for doing something that if it was a man, she'd be celebrated. History would not have tried to wash her out if she was a man. History would have celebrated her.
And the very men she took care of, because she wasn't just a general and a guerrilla, she was also doing care work, making sure people transition through these bullshit borders safely, making sure they are alive and well, and that people over here are in contact and are being taken care of. But those same things are vilified the very eve of democracy. And we don't have a moral conversation about that because democracy is too expedient. And of course, you know how it goes with politics, women later.
Yes.
For now, let's get the thing going, and we'll see about women later. And what we then cultivate is a culture of patriarchy, but a very violent culture of patriarchy. Yeah. So these 55% Hans who show up to vote are not just showing up against poverty, against displacement, against disenfranchisement in any and every career, against disappropriation. They don't own or have anything that they can put on record. But on top of the burden of sexual violence at staggering rates, right? Every moment we sit here, a black woman is ostensibly being raped in this country. Two every moment. And so what would the polls show either than a deeply anti-woman but deeply anti-black women sentiment and reflect even women. I mean, we should take example from the United States. It was white educated Hans who put Trump in power, the Republican Party in power, knowing that the Republican Party would mess up every marginal community, the black one in particular, but also that they would reverse all the gains of Roe versus Wade, of every measure that has been taken to protect the rights and reproductive health of women. So you're gonna get what you brew, and if you're asking for solutions, then a government that represents women in this country has to put before the economy, before education, the issue of sexual violence in this country. Every my fellow South African speech should be about how many women have been raped now, what recourse we are taking, and what recourse we're taking against comrades in Parliament, in the GNA.
Don't we have a national committee around?
Well, it doesn't work with the kind of force we saw during COVID, right? Where we were coerced to look at this daddy every now and then, giving us a breakdown of this pandemic, because the rate of femicide, rape and sexual violation in South Africa is endemic. And so the response to it should be my fellow South Africans' response. Outing these people who are killing women that they've raped in, parliamentarians because they need this thing to go away. Outing people who are themselves violating women in chambers. Because we've been part of the Flawless movement, and we recognize, even though we're the ones that birthed that movement ideologically and galvanized for it organizationally, we were still the ones that were facing sexual violation at Azania House, at residences, at VITS, at roads, everywhere where women were making the pots for the country, you know what I'm saying? For access to higher education, for representation in the academy. They were sexually violated, and they were and they were discredited. I mean,
Yeah,
who
yeah,
is our fees must fall hero now?
That
Who's
guy.
benefited from all of that? All the guys in parliament who
Yeah.
are representing parties now, even though we were vehemently against the representation of parties in our movement. And it's the guys who made, the brazen moves of throwing
it's
shit
not
on
that women
something.
weren't there.
But not
Yeah.
the movement came out of women, came from women,
Yes.
was organized and
Absolutely.
ideologically fed by women. We
The
were
women
doing
were
the
there, but
political education.
we don't see them anymore.
Because the point for women isn't to be seen.
Yeah.
We've got so much to
Yeah.
do. The point is to make things right so that our kids can live
Yeah.
a life without curfew. I mean, we live in a state of emergency, guys. Sine curfew
Constantly. You
in
cannot
2024 in South Africa, you can't just be out here in the streets, nanin. You have to devise a plan. How am I going to go out into Brampfontein?
Where am I
Ngiyaphi
going
eGoli?
into the city? Damn. Yeah, look, I think it's always incredible having conversations with other black women, but I always leave a little bit sad.
Because you want to overhaul society now.
No!
Like I was saying to you guys earlier on around your different PhDs and masters and all these fantastic topics, black women are constantly trying to change the world and make it better.
Yes.
For everyone, mind you.
I mean,
For everyone. So it always leaves me a little bit sad. Ukuthi hawe ma, kuko konke lokho esikwenzayo, we then
Sishwa
still
kanjani?
live in this context.
Kanjani?
We still live in this context. Okay, comrades, compatriots, in an effort to masculinize ourselves with the berets and the guns, the Good Party is the only one in the government of national unity. In fact, I think generally in the conversation around political parties that is led by a woman. They have a woman leader. And 100% with one seat, 100% women representation in parliament. I mean, obviously this speaks to the stuff that we've been talking about earlier on about, the kind of society that we find ourselves in and the culture that we've recreated, the patriarchal culture that we've recreated. But let me ask you guys, who would you guys, whether it's in people who are already in the GNU, who are part of different political parties, or it's women from different spheres, who would you vote for to be, whether it's in the highest office of the land, in all the high offices of the land, who would you vote for?
As you're speaking, I'm actually thinking, Uzanele Msibo, NFP.
Yeah.
I think she died too early.
Mm-hmm.
I think there could have been a lot that she could have done in that KZN legislature. But if there were to be a women's party, I would elect Uphumzile Lebogang. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. I
Yes.
agree with that. I agree with that. My goodness. But my one person is Vuyiswa Ramakgopa, through and through. I stand that lady. And the reason why is she's a person who continuously shows up for herself, but also shows up for the community around her. Mm-hmm. She's a person who's not afraid of the tough battles and tough conversations. And I think a woman who is pro-woman is important. Yes. And that is one woman who is pro-woman. I would vote for Vuyiswa Ramakgopa on any day.
Again and again.
Again and again. And I did vote for her because I think she ran a beautiful premier campaign. Mm-hmm. And for the provincial ballot.
Yeah.
I voted for her because I think it's important that we ensure that the women that we want to see, we are in the background and pushing them. But we also need to be able to challenge ourselves and push ourselves, because who's to say any of us sitting here can't be there?
I was just about to ask, why aren't you guys on the ballot?
Literally, when you asked this question, I thought to myself, well, I would want to vote for somebody like me.
Yes.
Somebody who is, well, you're going to
I would
disagree in
vote for
2
you.
seconds. Somebody who is completely and utterly disillusioned, one, with what we've imagined to be democracy, but two, the ways in which we constitute women, include and slip in women all the time. So disillusioned and done with all of that. And then as soon as you said Auntie Patty, I was like, yeah, Auntie Patty. And as soon as you said this, the woman you're thinking about died too soon, and I thought to myself, well, it must also be a Han who's prepared to die too soon.
Sure.
And even if I'm talking about Auntie Patty, I'm talking about Auntie Patty because she's been everywhere.
Yes.
Okay, she knows
Yes.
whose skeletons are where.
Yes.
She knows what they're doing
Where
wrong
the
in the
bodies
DA.
are buried.
She knows where the bodies are buried, and she knows what doesn't work, even though on paper it sings. You know what I'm saying? So Auntie Patty, for all of that experience, mix her with my level of disillusionment. Right?
Okay.
There's a reason she keeps going on, and I wish I knew so that we could completely disrupt and destroy that reason. So Auntie Patty can snap on these people, and she has nobody to be
back her
caucusing
up.
with.
Yeah.
It's just that Han in parliament
Yeah.
doing what she perceives to be good work, right? If there was a way we could pressurize Auntie Patty as ordinary black women on the ground to go and do our bidding and give her all of our support by showing up like we always do. We're supposed to have had like a National Women's Month in 56, but it was black women who showed up to do that. They put other people on the stage to represent those groups, but it was black women on the ground, you know, even carrying white women's children on their back, while the manifesto of FEDSAO
Yep.
said everybody wants to have childcare at work. And then you ask yourself, who's going to do the childcare?
Yeah.
Who always does the childcare,
Yeah.
right? So we should be on the ground for someone like Patricia DeLille, who isn't, hopefully, you know, there are the funders, our white funders, but hopefully who isn't tied to anybody who's going to be directing how and who and what she takes up and puts at the front. But then we must be prepared, and I'm sorry to Auntie Patty because I'm sure she has a personal life and loved ones and family and personal dreams. But we need somebody who's going to take the risk of what that move means, because men in South Africa, men in politics in South Africa have power. They use women to seem inclusive, to maintain the psyche of people who have been excluded since slavery, into colonialism, into apartheid. We need to have that facade of inclusion. And if you say here are women, then we're like, okay, all the gays and the disability and the other ones are also covered. Right? But the people who have power, the reason why implementation is such a problem in issues which pertain women politically is because men have power and they have no political will to change a scenario where they can grab who they want, where they can sexually violate who they want, where they can beat who they want. And where the only person they can do that to is the black woman, because, you know, all sorts of other social and racial currencies prevent them from doing it to other women.
I think
Anyway, it's Auntie
interesting
Patty who's as gloomy, as despondent as I am.
as you are.
I'd say I would still vote for you.
Amandla, do it.
Amandla.
Do it.
I think you know, a few years ago, I was a part of a conversation with around women leadership post apartheid, that kind of topic, and some of the women in the room were obviously women who were guerrilla girls, who were, you know, in the struggle in that way. And I'm just forgetting the ambassador's name who said this. She said, how sathi masibuya eZambia, when we came back from Lusaka, and we now had to do democracy, the same people we were soldiers with, the same people we carried guns with, then asked us to go back to the kitchen, or then said to us,
Imagine.
sesiyasebenza phela manje.
Hayibo.
So
Nifuna nina
you know,
la.
and so it speaks to this idea of, at that moment, what is it? What are some of the things that we agreed to? Sithanda singathandi. Still thinking about the nation, still putting the nation, we are putting the nation first. What are the things we agreed to that have created the society that we live in now. And I hope that the women that you've mentioned, I hope that, well, one, I know that there are plenty of them. I know that there are plenty of capable women. I mean, put yourselves on a ballot. Me, I'll vote for you. Tomorrow. Tomorrow.
I'll hold you too.
So I know that there are women out there who are capable of thinking and solutioning and doing the work that we're talking about here today, and the kind of implementation that we're talking about today. But, the risk, man.
And stereotypes hold us back.
Okay.
I think stereotypes hold us back because, as you made the point about the fact that those women who were carrying guns are now like, okay, go back to the kitchen. Those stereotypes hold us back because women are just as capable as men. And the thing, and women also carry the biggest amount of struggle just generally. We are so precarious, it's shocking. And I want to help build, and I want to live in a world whereas it's possible for me to be president, because why the hell not? Why is that not?
Why the hell
not? It should be imaginable.
Who will fund us? They ask.
Well, I'm sure the Oppenheimers will fund us. I'm sure the people who fund every political party in this country across the floor will fund us, and then we'll betray them.
Oh, yeah.
What happened to that move in politics?
Well done.
Why are black men in particular, so earnest with these people? Why aren't they taking the money and then expropriating the land? What's the crisis?
It benefit them though? Because when you're in a position of either perceived hegemony or actual hegemony, are you going to make a decision that disenfranchises you, because people always continuously want to hang on to power?
I think you can if you're a woman. And this is why I'm going to say something very radical, but this is why it makes no sense for men to be at the helm of a country, of a nation. When a nation is modeled after the family, it makes no sense for men to be at the helm of that. Because men, we've watched them take care of themselves and destroy all of the continent. But a woman has to take care, like we've been saying, not every woman, of course, and the incentive that's created for us is to turn on each other for our personal benefits. But I don't know how much you can personally benefit when, if you walk out at 8 p.m. in any neighborhood you are in, you're going to face the heat of being a woman regardless of what posts or money you have. Do you know what I'm saying? But I think that a woman should be the one who's at the helm of power, because who's thinking about everybody all the time?
Women.
Who's doing the economic distribution in the home? Who's making sure somebody's done that part so that somebody else can do that part so that this thing continues to function without money, without means? Who's in the Stockville making sure everybody goes through school?
Absolutely. Look, I agree with you 100%. But I want us to go back to this question of funding, because I think politics needs money. Especially if you're going to run, if you're going to run a solid campaign. I don't think we would sodinga belungu all the time, and I think we have to create that for ourselves.
Who's going to give it to us then?
Unfortunately, the funding system, particularly of political parties and politics in this country, is very much still the big dogs, the big energy, the big men politics we were talking about earlier on, is still reflected in the way that we think about funding and that we think about who funds who. And I think it's important that even for us, we must fund each other. We must fund the politics and the politicians that we want to see in power, that we think can make a difference.
Well, we fund everything else. I think masiqeda imali yabelungu. Asiqeda imali yabelungu. Look, anywhere on earth, anyway, where you need major money to fund political efforts, you're going to find that money sitting in white hands. In this country,
fine.
All the money, every industry is owned by white people.
Yes.
Those people must fund us. We must tell them a different story than what we tell on the ground. This is not snitching on our strategy. This is, since when do we tell them the truth anyway? When have we been safe that way?
Can I just add something?
I must take their money and run.
Something to that, just on the same point, but a bit of a digress. I think what we also need to realize, and I think it also touches on what you're speaking about, is people's perception after that. Right? Because you could say, okay, I am going to go to this specific group of funders to fund white women in politics or black women in politics, right? or women in politics generally. And yet the ground would respond and say, you are a sellout. You are not going to drive the agendas of black women. You are not going to drive pro-blackness because of who your funders are. Because the funding territory is a bit, it's a bit gray because the way how people respond to you when you get money from a particular person, regardless of what your manifesto or whatever you plan on doing as a political party, who funds you matters.
I think often that's
unfortunately.
And I think often that's a result of a fundamental misunderstanding
Yes.
of how funding political
Yes.
parties actually works.
I agree.
And how much influence
I
as a
agree.
funder you have over the politics of a
agree.
party.
I agree.
It's just a complete misunderstanding. Of course, there are people who fund particular political parties because of particular interests, because they want to keep the capitalist going,
Lobbies.
right? And they want particular lobbies. But there are also funders who have spread their interests far and wide, who've set it up in such a way that their interests are taken care of in different ways, or that they've set it up in such a way that it's not about their interests, but it's about the interests of the political party and of the people that they represent. I just think for me, we have to fund, and we have to find a way to fund politics and political parties and not shy away from being the ones who do that, right? Whether it's us as citizens, since the stokfela sifanda Ati for president, right?
I love funding stokvel for a political party. That's brilliant.
That's how we take care of business. And I hear you, what you're saying, Londi, because even though the logic works that the funders don't really have any power to do anything in the party.
Yeah.
What has informed the logic, at least of white monopoly capital in South Africa, in Southern Africa generally, is that you fund them until they're balling out, and then you threaten to withdraw that funding if they want to do certain things which you don't agree with. And because everybody's in Gucci and gold, it's too much of a cut to take. It's too much of a cut to leave the funder and let them threaten to leave and implement a policy which benefits people living with disabilities. I don't know. It doesn't. That's how it, in these real politique terms, tends to function. But if it's a woman, I can see how things might work differently. If it's a woman who cares about the people, because at the end of the day, the people suffering becomes their burden. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not because we have like special hormones that make us more caring and understanding. It's just a flow of logic that if nobody has a job in the home, the grandmother carries that burden. And so they need to work and have a system which feeds everybody so that she can have a free life to enjoy a democracy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to come in?
I just want to come in. You had made a point earlier on about childcare and the role of women within politics and childcare, right? And it made me think of a paper that the title of the paper is Representation Matters, Women Political Leadership, right? And one of the interesting points made here is that when a woman is in the room and when women are sufficiently represented, we are more likely to spend on care.
Okay.
We are more likely to spend on care than we are to spend on military or anything else, because these are issues that deeply impact women. So I just wanted to agree with you and acknowledge that point, because I think we fail to realize, and I know I've said this already, that a woman's place in politics and a woman's position and there being a certain level of parity only positively impacts the whole society. It's not only a woman's problem. It's not only a woman's problem. These are issues that deeply affect us all as a people. When women are in the room, we can drive particular change that is not only to the interest of women, but are in the interest of the broader society. We need to realize that, and we need to realize that we need to make space for women, and we also need to make space for one another and hold each other's hands. We could disagree on various points. I think you are just slightly a bit more radical than I am. that does not mean that we cannot hold each other's hands in the journey of ensuring that there is greater parity and ensuring that issues and solutions that are for the benefit of society at large are driven, not only by
I'd
women,
no sooner
but
trust
everyone.
you to hold my hand than the men who spout the radical politics, which I kind of intimate towards every day of the week, because you're more likely to do 20% of what I'm thinking about, and they're going to use my radical lingo to mobilize against me at every step of the political process.
Yeah. Oh my God, wonderful, wonderful conversation. I'm left with many, many thoughts. But one of the main things is that I would love to see not only yourselves, but women like yourselves on the ballot. Sicela ukunvotela. What that looks like, how we make that happen is a conversation I'm always willing to have. But I think it's important that we get the women in the room. But that we get women who are pro-women, who are pro-feminist, particularly pro-black women in this country, into the room, into the GNU, into any form of governance and governance structures that we want to think about. Do you want to add something?
No, I'm just saying, just imagine if Helen Zille was black in that GNU and we had...
We still wouldn't.
Yeah.
We still wouldn't be feeling it because the DA has the lowest number of women represented in the party, even lower than Mkhonto where much as everybody likes to drag that party for being anti-women. And this is the sector of women who benefited the most from black economic empowerment on the eve of democracy. They benefited and left the class of previously disadvantaged people. And yet,
no representation.
They don't really care about us.
No, and it's important that and I think the conversation has gone beyond a conversation about parity and representation, of course. It's important that we get the tangibles and the meatiness of feminism, of being pro-women, of being pro-black women in particular. And we're not going to get that from everybody in society. I mean, we know this. But how do we, and this is as a parting shot, how do we, and you maybe might not have, the grandest answers for this, but how do we integrate indlela esicabanga ngayo as women, as black women, into the fabric of society, so much so that the society becomes pro-black women, pro-poor, protecting children, protecting vulnerable girls. And I don't have the answers, but I think that it's... You don't have the answers.
I think she has the answer.
I have to have the answer.
Because what you said about holding each other's hand is actually, I think, how we change. We're not going to change men. We're not going to change rape culture. We're not going to change all the weird, funky things they're up to in parliament, in personal lives, in social, in church, everywhere. We're not going to change Boros and those guys. But what we can change is our perception of each other. So accept the girl next to you, even if she's a hoe. Accept the girl next to you, even if she's gay, even if she's trans. Don't be the DA. Even if she's a different political party. Accept that girl, because you're going through a bunch of the same things. Yeah. And I think if we can have that sentiment as soft as it feels in relation to the conversation we'll be having, then our instinct when we see a girl on the ballot, our instinct when we see somebody on stage talking, inviting questions, is to be holding their hand and to be for real with them. And we'll see the ones from the ones who are not, And I guess if we start to feel that way about each other, we may be able to take actions that demonstrate, that bring about a future of solidarity for ourselves. Because isn't it, we're being asked to be in solidarity with absolutely everybody else.
Yes.
But there is no black women solidarity movement.
What's
that
true.
about?
As a parting shot, I think there's a grave need for intentionality. from government and from just broadly everyone. There's a grave need for intentionality. We need to create space and hold space for women. We need to make sure that women are in the room, because I feel like when we went through our very incomplete national building process, we often left women out of the conversation. We did not create enough space for women, and we did not acknowledge the important role that women play in our society enough. The GNU speaks about having a potential national dialogue. I'm a bit pessimistic about that, because what's that going to look like? Are we going to create the necessary room for the voices of women? We speak about non-racialism, we speak about equality, we speak about creating a non-sexist society. Those things exist within the preamble of the GNU. Those things exist within the Constitution of South Africa, and yet those things do not translate in reality. They do not translate in legislature. They do not translate in parliament. We cannot be having 43% of women be the 43% representation of the women in parliament, 22% of women are premiers, if 55% of the people who vote are women. Where is the parity in that? Where is the international? It doesn't make sense. Where's the intentionality of that? Where are the women? The women are there. We just don't want to put them there. It's unfair.
We must just be cutesy and demure.
We must just be cutesy and demure.
Very cutesy, very demure.
Very mindful.
Not the basic basement, not the attic. Where you live.
Again, women leading the way. If this conversation is anything to go by, and any reflection of the women that we engage with and that we have in our society, in different parts of our society, women.